Hi, welcome to Right to Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, we're going to look at ways to show contrast in your writing. Okay, now this is actually part 2 of a two-part video series. Part 1, the link is up here if you want to go watch that video. We looked at the conjunctions, okay? Subordinating conjunctions, whereas, although, even though, while, etc. And we also looked at coordinating conjunctions, but, yet, okay? So that's part 1. Part 2, we're going to look at phrases, prepositions, and adverbials that we use in a similar way, similar meaning in terms of the function of showing contrast, but very different in terms of the mechanics of grammar and the mechanic of sentence structure, okay? So you have to be a little bit careful with these. They're very different from the conjunctions, but we're going to look at a few examples to see how they work. So again, there's part 1, what we looked at in the other video. In part 2, we're looking at phrases. On the other hand, on the contrary, as opposed to, in contrast, in opposition to this. That being said, linking terms. So linking terms basically make a bridge between sentences or between ideas or clauses. Nevertheless, nonetheless, notwithstanding, however, conversely. And we have prepositions, unlike, despite, in spite of. And I'm going to show you a few other terms that I didn't include in this list, but I'll explain to you why I didn't include it. So what we have to consider when we're looking at these words as opposed to the conjunctions is that you have a lot more flexibility. So let's look at some notes that we have to keep in mind. These phrases and words are modifiers. They are not conjunctions. Conjunctions are part of the clause. They're part of the independent clause or they're part of the dependent clause. These prepositions and adverbials and phrases are modifiers, means they're just showing a change. They're just changing the sentence, etc., which means that you can place them in different parts of the sentence. They could be at the beginning, in the middle, or the end. But you have to be very careful because where you put them might change the actual meaning of what they actually include, right? And again, you'll see when I give you some examples. These modifiers can be used to begin a new paragraph. The conjunctions, you should not begin a paragraph with a conjunction. You can use these phrases and terms to begin a paragraph as introductory phrases or terms. You can also use these, as before, you can use them to compare and or contrast. Now, just a little word here, because people ask me this quite often. If an essay says only compare, should I only show similarities? Well, keep in mind, the word compare, or to make a comparison, means to show the similarities and differences between among things, okay, or between things. So comparing also includes contrast. It depends on the question. If you're asked to compare and say which one you choose or which one you agree with, etc., at some point you have to show a contrast, or at least show how one is better than the other, because otherwise, why would you choose this one, not this one, if they are very similar? If all you did was show me similarities, then why choose this one, not this one? At some point, there has to be a contrast, so keep that in mind. We can also use these expressions to show a direct opposite or an opposition to something or a contradiction, and to concede and then contrast. Okay, and I'll explain what it means to concede. Now, a few notes we need to be aware of, okay? Be very aware of the difference between an introductory phrase and a phrase that acts as a preposition. So for example, on the contrary and contrary to. On the contrary is an introductory phrase. Contrary to is used like a preposition because to is a preposition. So after a preposition, and we're going to look at that in a second, you need an object, okay? In contrast versus in contrast to. In contrast is an introductory phrase. In contrast to can be used as an introductory or in the middle of the sentence or the end, okay? Another thing, and the only reason I mention this is because I see people making this mistake often. However cannot replace but or although as a conjunction, because however is not a conjunction. It's an adverbial, okay? It's basically used as an introduction or between commas as a gap to show that we're about to show a contrast, but it doesn't link clauses, okay? It can link sentences, but again, the meaning is the same as but or although. How you use it is different. So I put a couple of examples here. It must be followed by a comma. The judge pardoned the thief, but she stipulated that the latter would be on probation for 3 years. So the latter meaning the thief. So, but she stipulated that. The judge pardoned the thief. However, she stipulated that the latter would be on probation for 3 years. This is not correct. You cannot do it like this. So how would you fix it? After thief, you could put a semicolon. However, comma, she stipulated that. Because this is an adverbial. It's introducing the contrasting idea, the contrasting sentence or clause. You can't use it in the same way that you would use but or although. You can also put thief, period, capital H, however, comma, and then go on with your idea. Last note, prepositions are followed, or prepositions take an object. So despite this, you can never use despite without putting an object after despite, because despite is a preposition. In spite of something, unlike something, as opposed to something. Whenever the phrase or the expression ends in with a preposition, treat the whole thing as a preposition and give it an object, okay? Don't forget this, but again, we're going to see some examples to make this more clear. Okay, so let's start with on the other hand. Now, the first thing to remember is that you can use on the other hand in combination with on the one hand. On the one hand, on the other hand. You can use both. If you're using it on the other hand to show or to introduce a contrasting idea, on the one hand is unnecessary. Okay? As soon as you say on the other hand as a contrast, the on the one hand is already understood. Writing it is unnecessary. Now, some people think that these two things go in combination all the time. Not the case. Sometimes, yes. When you're using it as a contrast, no. And I'll show you when you have to use both, okay? Advocates of carbon tax suggest that penalizing polluters might discourage emissions and raise revenues for environmental protection. And then I go on with my paragraph. Last sentence of the paragraph, I'm summing it up. Thus, there is sufficient evidence to support this approach. So here's one side of the argument. On the other hand, now I'm telling you, I'm introducing the idea that I'm showing you the other side. On the other hand, critics of this view claim that the risk to the economy is not insignificant, as there are job losses, lost revenues, etc. Now notice that I can say critics of this view, on the other hand, claim that the risk too. Now, I don't even need to use it. I can take this out, but because I'm starting a new paragraph, as soon as you say critics of this view, it means you're showing the opposite view, right? The critics. So you're showing the other side. But because you're starting a new paragraph, you want that transition phrase, and especially for those of you taking the any language exam, especially IELTS or TOEFL, they're looking for these transitions between paragraphs. They want to see that connection of flow and logic. So on the other hand, critics of this view, and then go on with the contrasting view. Now you can replace on the other hand in this case to begin the paragraph. However, critics of this view claim. In contrast, critics of this view claim. In opposition to this approach mentioned in the previous paragraph, critics of this view claim that. So any of these can work to show contrast, and they're all basically synonyms, and they can all introduce a new paragraph. Now, if you want to use on the one hand, on the other hand, you can use it to show two different but complementary sides of the same thing. So in other words, you're making a comparison. You're not even showing a contrast necessarily, just showing a difference. There are two main reasons to choose to study abroad. On the one hand, there is the opportunity to experience a new culture and lifestyle. On the other hand, there is the added value of learning a foreign language. Okay, whichever reason is the main factor in making this decision, both will ultimately benefit the graduate. So they're not contrasting, they're not working against each other. They're just different. And if they work together, even better. If you take both of these reasons, you're still benefiting. They're not opposed to each other, okay? So keep in mind, on the one hand, on the other hand, could be used to show contrast. If it's being used to show contrast, on the one hand, not really necessary. If it's used to show a comparison or a complementary look at the differences, use both, okay? Because you're introducing one hand, the other hand. That's the whole point. There's only two hands, but two hands work together sometimes. They don't always fight each other. Keep that in mind, okay? Now, if you want to show a contradiction, if you want to show an opposite to something, but again, this is part of a comparison because you're looking at one thing and you're looking at maybe two sides to it sometimes. In contrast to popular opinion, the investor doubled down on his stake in the startup. The investor, in contrast to popular opinion, doubled down. The investor doubled down on his stake in contrast to popular opinion. All three sentences are correct. Notice that I'm using in contrast to, which means it's a preposition. Because the to is a preposition, you need a noun object, or you need some sort of object to it. In contrast to popular opinion means going against popular opinion, the investor doubled down on his stake. Means he invested some money, and then he invested even more money, thinking that the startup will do well. Now, you might be asking, well, what's the difference if I put it at the beginning, the middle, or the end? It's all about what comes in the next sentence, right? So in the first one, in contrast to popular opinion, and then ... the startup, the next sentence is going to talk about the startup, it's going to talk about the investment, or it's going to talk about the investor, because that's the ending of the sentence. In the middle, it's pretty neutral. You can talk about the investor, you can talk about popular opinion. The last one, I'm ending the sentence with in contrast to popular opinion. The next sentence will talk about why that is the popular opinion. What are other people thinking? What do they think about his decision to invest more money? So again, whatever comes near the end of the sentence is what will be the focus of the following sentence. If you put it the contrast at the beginning, you're not too worried about it. If you're putting it at the end, that's what you're going to focus on in your follow-up sentences. Now look at the next example. Most investors were wary of the spike in gold prices and were preparing for a drop. In contrast, Mr. Smith predicted a bull run and bought more of the metal. So notice here that I don't have the to, which means it's not a preposition. So this is an introductory phrase, which means I'm setting up the contrast. All right, I'm not necessarily comparing. I'm showing you a direct contrast. These people are doing this. In contrast, Mr. Smith is doing that. And then you have your full independent clause. So the two sentences are contrasting each other. The ideas of each sentence are in contrast. So we have in contrast to, something direct. So you're comparing his opinion and popular opinion. And then in contrast, as an introductory phrase, you're contrasting ideas between the two sentences. Now, in contrast to can be replaced by despite, in spite of, contrary to, in opposition to. Notice, despite, preposition, in spite of, preposition. Contrary to is the preposition. In opposition to is the preposition. In contrast, as an introductory phrase, you can replace with conversely, contrarily, okay? As adverbials, meaning this sentence that's coming is in contrast to the sentence that was before. This idea is in contrast to the previous idea. So it's very important to understand which one you're using. With preposition, without preposition, introductory, or not, basically. Let's go on. On the contrary. So now this is a completely different expression. It's different from contrarily. On the contrary is a fixed expression that's always going to be used to show a direct opposite of the idea that was presented in the previous. So basically, whatever was said in the first sentence, I'm going to directly contradict this and say the opposite in the following. Many people believe the CEO's resignation was evidence of his involvement in the scandal. On the contrary, his decision to leave the company was a reflection of his disgust with the board members who were trying to evade scrutiny. So right now, what we have here, we have what people believed and what is fact. So on the contrary means perception, reality. Perception, truth. Now, which is why you can replace on the contrary with in fact or actually. Now, I didn't include in fact or actually in my list of contrasting terms because these can contrast. They show perception and reality, perception and truth, but they can also be used in other ways. They can be used to emphasize or to reinforce an idea that was mentioned previously. That will be a part of a different video altogether. So be careful with in fact and actually. What they mean is that, no, it's not what you think. Here's what it is in fact. Okay, the truth, the reality, as opposed to the perception of the reality. Now, another thing I want to point out, when I use on the contrary, notice that I put a semicolon and then I introduced the next idea with the on the contrary as an introductory phrase, and then I went into my independent clause. Okay, Very important, because that's the most common way to use on the contrary, because the two sentences have a very direct relationship to each other. That's why I'm using the semicolon. Now, if you're not sure how to use a semicolon or colon, there's another video I made about these two specific punctuation marks. You should watch that video and understand that there must be a relationship here. In this case, it's a direct contrasting relationship. Perception, reality. Okay, good. Okay, let's move on. Now, concession. What is a concession? When you concede a point or an argument or an idea, what you're doing is you're saying that, yes, I agree that this is a valid point. I agree with what you're saying. I agree with the argument and I accept the argument. But here's an alternative view or alternative argument or alternative way to look at things. So accept what's been said, but show a contrasting or alternative view or action or whatever the case may be. Environmental concerns were a major factor in the decision to scrap the project, as several studies concluded that it would take just one significant spill to irreparably damage the surrounding ecosystem. So they did a study. They decided that the pipeline, the oil pipeline, not going to happen because even one spill will create certain damage. Okay. Now, that being said, so we accept that, but, and then we go on to the other side of the alternative, the other side of the argument. The committee was quick to acknowledge that this ecosystem is already in danger and that the portion of the project's revenues that would be allocated to environmental protection is sorely needed. So yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it could do a lot of damage, but this ecosystem is already in trouble. We need the money from this project in order to help take care of the environment. So they're not completely, like they decided to scrap the project. They're not going to let it happen. But they're leaving a little bit of a door open in case the oil company decides, okay, let's renegotiate. We'll do something to make it more safe. We'll figure something out so that it's not completely impossible, right? So that being said, I accept what you said. Here's an alternative argument. Here's the other side that we must also look at. You can replace that with nevertheless, nonetheless, notwithstanding this decision. Despite this decision, again, notwithstanding is like a preposition. You need the object. Although notwithstanding can sometimes stand by itself without the object. Despite needs the object, etc. So nevertheless, nonetheless, these are concession adverbials. Concession plus contrast. Okay, I hope this is all pretty clear, because the reason we're looking at all these different words, you don't need to know all of them, but you need to have more than 2 or 3 in your pocket ready to use, because any good writing requires variety. You don't want to use the same words all the time. You don't want to say that being said, that being said, that being said, that being said. You want to have different expressions ready to use as the situation presents itself to make your writing more interesting to the reader. Okay? So now let's look at comparison. Now again, remember, comparison includes looking at the differences of things. Unlike their previous smartphones, the company's latest models are protected by a biometric technology that cannot be bypassed. So we're looking at smartphones. Okay, we're comparing smartphones, the new ones and the old ones. Unlike their previous smartphones, the ones they had before, the new ones have biometric technology. The company's cutting-edge smartphones, unlike their older models, are protected by biometric technology that cannot be bypassed. I can put it in the beginning, I can put it in the middle, I can put it in the end. The company's cutting-edge smartphones are protected by biometric technology that cannot be bypassed, unlike their older models. Now, here, it's very, very important that you pay attention to where you're putting your comparative, okay? Because you will put the comparative next to the thing that's being compared. So unlike their previous smartphones, the company's latest models are protected by biometric technology. The previous smartphones, no biometrics. The new smartphones have biometrics. The company's cutting-edge smartphones, unlike their older models, are protected by biometric. Yes to biometric, no to biometric. But the last sentence is different. The company's cutting-edge smartphones are protected by biometric technology that cannot be bypassed, unlike their older models. So the older models had biometric technology. The new models have biometric technology, but the old ones could be bypassed. The new ones cannot be bypassed because the comparative, the unlike, is closer to the last point made That's what's being compared. You're comparing the ability to be bypassed, not whether they have biometric technology or not. So be very careful about placement because it can change the meaning. And as we saw before, it can predict what the next sentence will be depending on which expression you're using, right? And another way to look at this, university education offers theoretical knowledge as opposed to the practical skills offered at colleges. So we're comparing university education to college education. So university offers this, colleges offer this. Okay, so we're comparing the type of education, theoretical versus practical. University education offers theoretical knowledge, unlike college, which offers practical skills. So it's a direct comparison, but I'm showing a difference. I'm distinguishing between the types of education you're going to get in each type of school. Okay, Steve decided to take the bonus as opposed to utilizing all of his vacation days. So here I'm talking about only Steve and his decision. So I have to distinguish between his two options, right? He could take the bonus, he could take the vacation days. This as opposed to that, okay? So I'm not showing you a contrast and I'm not comparing the two things. I'm just showing you what the two separate options are basically, and then which one he decided on. So here I can't say take the bonus unlike utilizing because again, I'm not comparing. I'm just showing you the two different options. Now, we can use all of these things in combinations. And you have to be very careful because each one has to have its function, its purpose, right? So let me give you a little bit of a background. You have an essay asking if all criminals should be charged the same way for all crimes, right? So if somebody stole money because they're greedy and somebody stole money because they have to feed their family and they have no other way, should these two criminals be treated the same way? So you had your first paragraph saying whatever you said, that they're all committing crime, they have to basically pay back society somehow. And then you, in the second paragraph, you want to distinguish. So, however, unlike criminals who harm others for pleasure, those who steal or act in ways that are ultimately aimed at helping others cannot be considered in the same light. So you have to be very careful. What are you doing here with the two contrasting words, right? However means you're about to begin the contrasting view in contrast to paragraph 1, right? So you're contrasting paragraph to paragraph. Unlike criminals, here you're directly comparing criminals. So however, contrasting to paragraph, unlike contrasting the criminals within the sentence. So you can use both, but each one is contrasting different things. Paragraph to paragraph, criminal, this type of criminal to that type of criminal. Comparison. Contrast, comparison. Notwithstanding their lack of intention, those who commit crimes are nevertheless acting against society. So even though, or notwithstanding, so we accept that we accept that they committed a crime, but they didn't have intention. They didn't really want to do something bad. They just maybe did it by accident even. Even though we accept this, still, those who commit crimes nevertheless did it. So notwithstanding, we concede, we have a concession, we accept the fact that they didn't do it intentionally, but they did commit a crime nevertheless. So nevertheless, here is not showing you a concession, it's not showing you a contrast. It's showing you an emphasis. It basically means commit crimes, those who commit crimes are still acting against society. So it doesn't matter that why they did it, they still did it. So they're still criminals, right? As such, they should be treated in a certain way. So nevertheless, or nonetheless, both of them, not only used to contrast, or to concede, but in most cases they are. But it's good to know different uses for them. On the other hand, despite their best efforts to find ethical and legal means to support their families, some people are just unlucky and cannot succeed. So again, on the other hand, you're talking about the previous paragraph and this paragraph, two contrasting ideas. And then despite their best efforts, so even though they try very hard, they're just unlucky and they can't. Notice that despite and even though essentially mean the same thing, but even though is a conjunction, it's going to be followed by a clause, subject, verb. Despite is a preposition, it's going to be followed by an object, best efforts. Just make sure that you understand which one and you're using the structures correctly. On the other hand, paragraph to paragraph, despite efforts, even though their efforts are contrasting to their best efforts. Good. That's it. I hope this was a little bit helpful. If you have any questions about this, please don't forget to ask me here below at YouTube or on my Facebook page. And just keep in mind that the key to understanding how to use all of these words is basically know the structure, know the function, and be careful about placement. Introductory phrase, prepositional phrase with a prepositional ending, what follows it, where you can put it, what the meaning is, etc. Just keep all these things in mind and you should be able to use these well. So I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please give me a like. If you really liked it, please subscribe to my channel and come back for more videos about writing, vocab, grammar, test tips, and all this other good stuff. I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.